viewers out there. We are doing another Curious Hunter podcast back here at Sheep's Head. I'm John. This is Tim. We have a really awesome guest on right now. Do you want to go ahead and introduce?
Yeah, I guess disclaimer: this is the first time we've been remote.
Yes.
You've seen like us at live parties. You've seen us fireside here. You've seen us sitting in Yeti chairs in the shop. This is the first time we've done remote, so feedback is welcome. We are stoked because this gives us a much bigger reach. Who can join us? Not everybody can fly down here to the beautiful central coast of California. Although I do know that our guest does travel through here ever so often, or has recently. So, no, our guest today is Jared Frasier, and Jared is the executive director of 2% for Conservation. 2% for Conservation, we'll get into the details. It's an organization dear to my heart. They help businesses, and Jared, please jump in, but they help businesses to donate time and money to various conservation causes of their choosing. So businesses will jump on and they want to get 2% certified, and Jared is one of the people that they talk to. And so the theme of this episode will certainly be conservation focused, which is one of the Curious Hunter themes in general.
Yeah,
so we're excited about that. So welcome, Jared.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah.
And so, like Tim said, and I don't know how much you know about it. I know Tim has talked to you a little bit, but the Curious Hunter basically came out of my pursuit into the world of hunting and fishing. I grew up, I did Boy Scouts, kind of quit that when I was maybe 12 to start skateboarding and playing punk rock with friends, and still kind of got outside a little bit. I grew up in the Bay Area, so Tahoe was close, and I'd go snowboarding, but I haven't been backpacking since I was a kid doing Boy Scouts. So when the pandemic hit, I started getting curious about this stuff, started thinking about hunting. It started to push my mindset and perspective, especially growing up in the Bay Area, working with a lot of tech people who are kind of side-eye the hunting culture a little bit. And it was cool to kind of break through that a little bit. So that's why we're here. I think because conservation, like you said, is definitely a draw, for someone like me. And I think for most people that are starting to get more interested in the outdoors, especially when it comes to hunting and fishing. So yeah, maybe if you want to build on some of what Tim said to kind of explain what your organization is all about.
And maybe before that, like you, Jared, as a human, like where do you come from? What led you to Montana and then to 2%?
Yeah, so I'm kind of I'm going to use this term carefully, unicorn, because it means lots of different things for lots of different communities. But in the hunting and angling world, I had both my parents. My dad took me hunting and fishing, and it was a big part of our lives. And that is not the norm for the majority of people our age in hunting and angling.
Right.
So I was very fortunate on that side. Now, we looked up at the poverty line. We were extremely poor. So the hunting and angling, it was absolutely tied to putting food in the freezer and on the table.
That's cool.
For a long time. I remember my first McDonald's, because I was old enough to remember it because I had never had it before then.
Right.
And everything I ate was venison, and usually venison, walleye, panfish. Name an animal in northern Wisconsin, even ones you trap, and I knew what they tasted like at a very young age.
Wow.
I was a couple months old. My parents were ice fishing, which is when you drill holes. You've got it in California to some extent. You drill holes and then you fish through the ice. Well, they drilled a hole about this deep and put me in it when I was about 2 months old so that they could run and go and get the tip ups. All the flags were coming up because a bunch of walleye had come in. And that's how deep it goes for me on that end. Trapping and stuff was part of it too, because it was a way for my dad to make some money. It was just a part of my life. And so it was when I got to my teenage years and I start finding out like no one does this. Like hardly, even in northern Wisconsin, like there's opening day of rifle season, and everyone would go out in the woods and get drunk, but no one was out there year round finding out what the fish are, what level they're at different times of year in the lakes, where the deer are moving through. So that close connection led to also my parents having a very, very early influence on me with conservation. When I was about 7 years old, they were working at a summer camp, a kids camp, and the DNR approached and said, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources approached and said, "Hey, we're low on trout. You guys have a creek running through your property here at this camp. Can we put a fish hatchery here?"
Oh, cool.
And I might have those details slightly fuzzed. My dad listens to every single podcast, so
he will let us know if you got it wrong.
There, but I do remember the DNR being involved, and I went there and helped. Put in this hatchery as a little kid. Probably causing a lot more harm than help at that age. But from that early point, taking care of the landscape and taking care of the different species that we wanted to go after for food was very connected. The whole idea of hunting for fun is still something that I don't have there's times where it is fun,
right?
But I'm not thinking I want to go out and try to find the biggest animal I can to tell my friends about it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go out, I want to find the biggest animal I can to put it in the freezer so that we have enough food.
Right.
And even between me and my youngest siblings, who are about a decade younger, there's a very, very different connection to hunting and angling. They grew up in the same family, but parents started making some money around the time I moved out. And so for them, they started going on more, guided experiences and stuff like that. And let's see how many does we can get and how many tags we can get to try to keep you kids fed. So that was the start of it for me. How I ended up in Montana is I had two different acceptance letters for a 1-year school in Montana and then a job in Austria. And I threw them both up in the air. I was teaching outdoor education in southern Wisconsin. Threw them both up in the air. I was like, whichever one lands face up is where I'm going to go. And the Austria one slid under the refrigerator.
Oh,
wow.
So I ended up out here in 2007. So about 17 years now, this August. And it was a big fire year. And we were driving through smoke all the way through the Dakotas and stuff. And we got to the school, and I still had not seen a mountain yet. And the school was supposed to be like on the edge of the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Big mountains on all the brochures, the janky website they had, big pictures of mountains once they finally loaded, And like the whole first week, you could have told me I was in the Black Hills. I would have believed you. I went hiking up with some of the other kids that first weekend, and we went up. I realized we were going up pretty high, but it was so smoky you could hardly see. And when I woke up the next morning, one of my classmates from Mexico, I heard him go, "Dios mío." And I was like, "What? Oh no, what's going on?" I open up my bivvy, and it is just mountain peaks as far as you can see.
That's quite an introduction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Flair for the dramatic.
I look down in the saddle, and there's a whole herd of bighorn ram, and then I hear further down some elk bugling.
Wow.
And I was
so
done.
cool.
Yeah.
Never
going back to northern Wisconsin.
Well, at that time I was living in Iowa, so I had a contract to fulfill the next summer, but I called them that afternoon when I got down. I said, "I'm going to fulfill the contract. I'm gone after that. I've seen what is possible for where you can live." And I was 20, so
absolutely.
That's how I ended up out here. We ended up having kids a little earlier than planned, my wife and I. So job changes took place. I actually ended up getting into tech. I had been teaching outdoor education at a couple different states and was doing outdoor recreation programs at some private clubs here, which was a far cry from taking inner city kids out to see the stars for the first time. But kids dealing with a lot of the same stuff, a lot of parental neglect and whatnot at those clubs. And we had ours, and they wanted to move us every 6 months, and I said, "No, we're staying here." So learned how to code, started making websites and stuff. That ultimately led me to have time to go hunting again. I had stopped hunting when I was 16, and I was 22, and I realized, 23, and I realized that freezer that we had did not have venison in it, and I had a baby.
Yeah.
So started finding places to hunt, which led me to like the RMEF website. To see where they had been purchasing land. It had been put into public land for DIY hunters. And through that, saw they had some events coming up, started volunteering at those events because I started seeing problems where I was going out hunting. And what ultimately got me the job here was I volunteered alongside Randy Newberg 2 dozen times easily. And he called me one morning and said, "Hey, you need to go to the Stone Glacier offices. 2% is looking for someone." And I thought I was going to do like the marketing, web design and stuff. And Jeff Sposito, who's the founder of 2%, when he was at Sitka, he was the CEO of Stone Glacier at this point. And he said, "So why do you want to be the executive director at 2%?" I did not know that's what I was applying for.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
So I
Uncle
just
Randy
told him
just
that.
sent you over there blind, and
Early in the morning, he called me like before 7 a.m. I thought someone died.
Well, that doesn't.
You know?
I mean, that fits perfectly with Randy Newberg. He's an early
Yeah.
riser.
Yeah, it turns out he had just had breakfast with Jeff, and Jeff was saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
get someone over here." Randy was actually on our founding paperwork. Randy was the accountant who signed off.
No way.
on
Really
some of
cool
the things.
story.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It actually it goes. Conservation in my family goes back past my parents, definitely on my dad's side. My great grandpa and my grandpa helped make the first muskie hatchery in Wisconsin. They needed expert plumbers to do it, and the family trade was plumbing and heating, and had been since 1917. My great grandpa actually brought toilets to my folks' hometown of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, on a horse-drawn trailer.
Wow.
Brought them up from southern Wisconsin and would sell them out the back of his trailer, saying, "Do you know about indoor plumbing?"
Awesome.
And so
cool.
I've got copies of the articles of them from I think it was 1960s and 70s, different hatchery things that they helped with to try to bring the muskie back. The muskie is kind of Wisconsin's official, unofficial, game fish. You keep one and you're going to get your tires slashed. Like the culture around conservation with muskies in Wisconsin, it goes to almost everybody. But my family was deeply connected to it, and taking walks with my dad and with his uncle, my great uncle David, who I'll be hunting with both of them this fall for the first time since I was 16. The conversations with them always went around, what are the deer doing? What do the deer need? What are the turkeys doing? What do the turkeys need? Whatever we're going after doing right now, what do they need right now? And how are things impacting in a positive or negative way? Loons, actually a non-game species, were where I first got borderline tree huggy real quick as a kid, because people showed up at the lake that we lived on, which northern Wisconsin, living on a lake doesn't mean anything. There's more water than land. In fact, you probably have high odds of getting flooded and are likely not that well off, at least back then when I was growing up. But there were loons nesting on the lake. And if anyone doesn't know about them, they're the ones that when you are in a jungle or in a desert or somewhere that loons don't live in a movie, that's the bird sound you hear if it's not a red-tailed hawk.
Wow. Okay.
And oh man, it takes me out of movies so fast, especially sci-fi ones when they're on another planet. I'm like, I grew up with that sound. But they're the ones that have
Indiana
that
Jones is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yes. Oh my God. See, now my whole day is ruined. But loons, we had them on the lake, and my great grandpa, he passed away when I was 11, but I got to know she was either his fourth or fifth wife. She was not from the U.S. Originally. She had a very thick Eastern European accent. And one day she saw the bald eagles dive bombing the loons. And she called my dad over, and then a couple days later called me over and told us we needed to shoot those eagles. Bald eagles. Dive bomb. Like, no, we're going to go away forever for that. But what happened at the lake that really kind of triggered like some element of, within conservation, you're essentially telling people no, or not that way, or let's do it this way instead. That's essentially what conservation is. And if you really dumb it down way too far, right? And loons nest on the waterline. The favorite activity of people who go to northern Wisconsin for vacation from anywhere is jet skiing and wakeboarding and water skiing, which leaves a huge wake. And what it does is takes those eggs that are in that nest right on the water line, bumps them up, and they're in the lake.
Throws them around.
And everywhere that wakes were allowed at that time, as jet skis were becoming affordable for virtually everyone coming up from Illinois and from elsewhere, loons were disappearing everywhere.
Wow.
And we saw a boat come out on the lake one day, and it was leaving a huge wake, and they were having, I could tell I was like 13. I could tell they were having fun. Like, it looked fun.
Yeah.
They had teenage kids with them. I wanted to be doing what they were doing. And then I saw the wake going around the edge. I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
Called my dad, called my uncle who lived around the bay.
My loons.
Trying to figure out, how do we stop this, and how do we make sure that the loons aren't dead? The babies aren't dead.
Yeah.
So that was always there. That said, trust of biologists and good science, as opposed to anecdotal data that you might hear around the water cooler, was far removed from my childhood. And it's something my family's now embraced over the years.
Sure.
But when you're hungry and you're being told no for usually good conservation reasons, that's not a no that you listen to.
Right.
And we're beyond statute of limitations for things, but our freezer was full year round.
Right.
With venison year round.
Yeah.
And sometimes, because my folks were helping a lot of kids who had abuse at home, we had teenage kids living in our house from like the day I was born.
A lot of hungry mouths to feed.
Yeah.
Many, many mouths to feed. My mom thought a miracle was happening and that the freezer always stayed full. My dad knew how
better.
the freezer
He knew why.
and was directly involved with that process. With assistance actually from local game wardens who knew that my family was taking care of lots of people and were making like less than $5,000 a year the year I was born.
Wow.
So that relationship, that took some developing for me.
Sure.
And I can honestly say it wasn't until I was probably halfway into my career of teaching outdoor education, working with biologists and seeing why they were doing what they were doing. The same things that I used to say, DNR stood for Don't Know Ruttin', because we're hillbillies and make actions turn into other things when you're scared of it or don't understand it.
Yeah.
And there were some decisions made that were political, not made by the DNR, but they got the blame, right? It wasn't until I've been teaching outdoor ed for quite a while that I saw some of the other side of it. So I have this weird combination of my childhood being DIY conservation in partnership where it made sense for subsistence living.
Yeah.
But then my late teens, early 20s being more on the academic side when I didn't hunt. I was moving too much. I couldn't get tags. It just wasn't feasible. But I was working with the very same people that I used to loathe when I was a kid and told to not trust and stuff. And so it's put me in a fairly favorable position in this organization because our membership runs the political spectrum. In one day, I will talk to someone on the far extreme of any issue in the States because our country is coming up with great and new ways to disagree with each other about great many things all the time. I'll talk to one person who would get into a fist fight with another person who's on the other side, and they're both in our membership.
Right.
But when it comes to wildlife conservation, that's where they come together. And it's put me in a unique, not always comfortable, but unique spot to understand where they're coming from.
Well, it fascinating for me to hear that story and that perspective of, someone like yourself that grew up with that, coming from definitely looking at it as food and then that moving its way into conservation. And I'm curious, and you kind of started going there a little bit. How did that actually lead to 2%? Like, how did you go from that, growing up, it was definitely for food, to a point where you had to hunt more often than not, to realizing, oh, okay, there's a reason why these conservation efforts and policies are in place, to then establish something like 2%?
Yeah, so that transition for me, as far as in the brain, happened while I was teaching outdoor education.
Okay.
Learning the science behind what I had seen in the field and why certain policies would come and just how often politics got in the mix. And when you see how often politics get into effect, and I mean like virtually anything, almost every state has you can put a ballot initiative of to cancel out field science, and it can be on any side of the political spectrum with that. When you see that, you also start to see who's doing the real work, what is making a difference, and what's just rhetoric used to empower someone who's looking for power. We mentioned Randy earlier. One of my favorite quotes of his is the easiest way to get involved with wildlife biology is to get elected. And that's the truth. Or to have just a ton of money and be able to call it a grassroots thing when it's not. And I want to be clear on this. Some people will go, and this is just how broad our membership is. Some members right now, if they hear this, they'll go, oh, he's talking about trying to remove hunting rights. And then other ones will go, oh, he's talking about how lobbying is making sure some animals are being pushed to extinction by certain ethicists. And both cases are true. Some more true than others at different times and in different places. Working in conservation, you have to understand that ecosystems are not fungible, and species populations are not fungible. Prime examples are sheep, both thinhorn and bighorn.
Sure.
Most hunters don't know that their annual, grazing and water chasing is taught by the matriarchs in the herd, the ewes. And then the rams, they're just being dumb, and they follow along from a distance until the girls put up with them for a couple months.
Wow.
And then they're separated again. If you go and put a housing development on top of a water resource in Nevada, which happens all the time, that herd is going to be in town, and everyone's going to wonder why. Well, you took their water away, and the girls don't know where to go. They go, okay, well, let's move them from here to over there. You can do that, but the mortality rate is very high if water is a limited resource because they've not been able to hand off that information on where to go during various times of the year. Same goes for feed. I'm a big proponent of getting out and recreating. It's why in our things that we count as giving back towards conservation, access is in there, because if people don't go out there, they won't care. And we see this with various ballot initiatives that ultimately hurt species. One of those things could be allowing certain types of motorized recreation in very sensitive areas, or other types of loud recreation, like with the loons and the boats, but also dirt bikes in calving areas for elk. You push them out of their protective zone, now the predators get them. Or like with caribou, back in 2019, we got a call very end of the year, from someone up in British Columbia. It was right after the extirpation of the last caribou in the lower 48 out of the panhandle of Idaho. Back in 2010, I was fortunate enough to see one. I thought it was a sick elk because even though I had read Roosevelt's journals, I forgot caribou were in the lower 48. And I was like, what is wrong with that elk? And I was trying to get my camera out, and it walked away. Went down to the gas station. I was like, I'm pretty sure I saw a sick elk. It almost had like caribou style antlers. And they're like, no, you saw caribou. Well, that herd ended up being extirpated to British Columbia, into the central Selkirks. And they were in a situation where the activities both of recreation and logging had pushed the caribou out of their calving areas and right where every predator could get them, and where they could be run down by people on vehicles, by accident sometimes, and out of their feed and stuff. And we got called, and they said we need $65,000 Canadian by like end of next week to helicopter in all these supplies. We lost our grant through the government. They pivoted it to some other thing. And if this doesn't happen, we're going to lose the southernmost herd of caribou in North America again. The one that we moved them all to. And by them all, I mean the last couple. And we called up our membership and said, here's the deal. They need a helicopter. They need to get the stuff in. They're going to be deep in the mountains. And then from there, they're going to need help like guarding these caribou and all this. And part of the conversation, that happened later, not on the first ask, was, and a big part of what they're going to have to protect from is people.
Yeah.
People that want to go see them, people that want to go ride their snowmobiles right through there in the middle of winter when they're in a tiny little area where they can get food, where the wolves can't get to them, where the lions can't get to them. And even within our membership, those kind of conversations, sometimes that's where the ball ends up being dropped. We'll have momentum, but as soon as, in this, it happens limitedly within our membership, but in the general population, it happens a lot. When it comes up against someone's personal activity, that, you know, their preferred activity or their kids' preferred activity, you run into issues there. So for 2%, and for me taking that transition over, there were a lot of activities I loved. Rock climbing, still love it. A lot fatter, kind of hard to do now.
You're pulling a lot more weight up that hill.
Yeah. We have a little bouldering wall we built during pandemic lockdown in here, and I'm not proud of the amount of pull-ups that I might or might not be able to do on it. But I was really into that, and sometimes that put me in places I should not have been in. Right. For pronghorn, when they're having their fawns, for elk, for calving, and then other species as well. And with 2%, it was launched by Jeff Sposito when he was over at Sitka. It was kind of an internal program originally. And after he left Sitka, it became more of like all businesses can get involved. It became its own 501c3, and it became an independent entity to try to have this alliance of businesses and individuals who support conservation with their time and dollars.
And what year was this, Jared?
What's that?
About what year was this?
So this was at the end of 2016, it became official. And then I was hired on at the end of 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, it founded in 2015 to the IRS, but as far as went public, it was 2016.
Okay. Right.
And the majority of people who signed on initially were individuals just making the pledge to do what the businesses will do.
Right.
And that's when I first heard about it. I was member number 11. I think Randy was member number 4 or 5. Jeff and some of his friends were obviously 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sure.
And it was really kind of Bozeman based. Until they went to an event at the end of 2016. That is where I first interacted personally with what the idea was. And then in 2017, it was kind of, we're either going to make this real or, get off the pot. And that's when I was hired on the day of the summer solstice. Or not summer solstice. I heard about it summer solstice. I was hired on the total eclipse that happened in 2017. On the way home, driving through Yellowstone, found out.
That's amazing.
So, it's from there. Our first business members were gear companies exclusively, gear or hunting related. But within my first week, we started getting businesses that were not. The very first business I signed was actually 2 13-year-old girls who were babysitting in Indiana and had heard about this on a podcast from a year prior.
Wow.
And they wanted to be certified with it so it would make them more marketable in their neighborhood. Which
somebody's raising those girls right on both
right?
ends.
I think they're in college. I keep trying to find them because they got into high school, 2020 happened, and kind of lost contact. They would be in college now. And I'm hoping one of them applies for a grant and I can see their name again. Because I'm on a couple different boards and committees that give out grants to people doing wildlife conservation work, especially students. I'm just one of these days.
Yeah, it's gonna come full circle.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I love the story of the membership base. Here at Sheepshead, obviously we are involved in outdoor pursuits, hunting, fishing, camping, etc. So kind of along the lines of those original members that you were talking about, that were sort of equipment based. Give us an understanding, the from the young ladies selling lemonade. I don't know if that's babysitting is what you said, but some of the other types of businesses that are involved in, and because I think the varied nature of that, and then also the varied nature of along the political spectrum, say these polar opposites. Conservation it is not an extreme on one end or the other. It is like we live a lot in gray area when we talk about conservation, and there are some absolutes. Like if humans and animals interact in the same environment, then we need to have certain things in place to make sure that the animals and the humans are successful. But help us to understand a little bit of like what is 2%'s client base look like? Like what are some examples of some of the businesses that are certified?
Well, even on our board, we have a decent range of representation. We have Jesse Bone out of BC with a film and media company, and,
Cool.
and they take on all kinds of projects. Not always outdoor ones, but a lot of them.
Sure.
We also have Stone Glacier, Lyle Hibble. He's their marketing guru over there, essentially, and he's the one who created our logo and stuff before he was at Stone Glacier. So that's a gear company. But then we also have Mike Schmillen out of the Twin Cities, who's got a tile and stone, flooring company.
Yeah.
And then we have Neil Keown up in Alberta, and he has a drone inspection, like using drones to inspect pipelines and things like that. That's his company.
Yeah.
We have a pretty broad range just within our board there. We've also had elopement and wedding photographer on our board out of Jackson Hole, where she would take folks out into the Grand Tetons and do their elopement like up in the mountains.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Really cool.
But in our membership still, we also have like a piano repair company out of Alabama. We have realtors in various states.
Yeah.
Coffee companies, backpacking meal companies, a distillery in Chicago, outside Chicago, that makes specifically spirits using locally foraged things.
Very cool.
And I got to make a visit there.
Yeah.
We've had wineries and breweries. We've got doctors, veterinarians.
Yeah.
It's really any kind of business. And
That's
the
so cool.
real key is that it matters.
Yeah.
That conservation matters to either the owner, ideally the owner, because then that kind of guarantees they stick around, but also the employees, that it's a big deal to the employees. And the way our model works with volunteering time and employee time, it kind of guarantees that to a degree. And we have every year, a couple come on that they don't understand the time volunteering part, and then they do it and they get hooked. And they get hooked hard because we help them have a lot of fun with it out of the gate, and they see how good it can be for their business too, both for the internal marketing and the external and branding and all of that.
Yeah.
But it's literally any kind of business.
I love that.
Yeah. And even just kind of, looking at that wide array for anybody that is kind of curious about how this works, whether they just want to know or want to get involved. What are the mechanics of that? So obviously 2%, there's 1%. I forget what it is, but it'd be cool to kind of hear you explain how that logistically works.
So we're unique in that we are a certification that requires two different things.
Right.
And it's time and dollars. And the four things that we count as conservation, because you can't really, someone defining it, like in 2018, I sat down because we were getting businesses that wanted to sign on because they supported like a local shooting range. And that's all they did was the local shooting range, which fun, cool. Does the shooting range do conservation? That one, no. Do some? Yes. Okay, how do we define it? So we define it as existing in one of four buckets. Either boots on the ground work, that's the sexy stuff. Collars on animals, bands on birds, trail work, habitat work, boots on the ground stuff. That one's obvious to understand. But then advocacy and education are second and third. And advocacy is some of that going to the legislature and getting a billboard about something, or using your business as a platform for folks in the conservation space to share with people in power what needs to happen. And we have business members who host government agency, conservation group, meet and greets and stuff on a regular basis. You've used your place on the education side already,
Sure.
Which is providing education to the public about the needs of wildlife and why conservation should be important to you if you just live on this planet, much less hunt, fish, backpack, mountain bike, horseback,
Whatever.
all the
Yeah.
things. And then the fourth is that access, because like I said earlier, if people don't have access to the outdoors and to wildlife, they don't know what they're missing. And they're getting the same dopamine hits likely from playing a farming game on their phone. Nothing against that. I play some of those with my family, and it's lovely. But it's not the same as knowing that you're making a place viable for your well-being, because we know how important that is, but also for your whole community. Communities that really put an emphasis on time outdoors have lower depression rates, lower suicide rates, lower crime rates, lower substance abuse rates. If it's not something that they have to do for subsistence. I grew up in a major substance abuse area, which is why our house was full of kids, even though wildlife was everywhere. It was just very impoverished. But when you have access to it for people, all your the things that matter as far as metrics for your community go up. So
awesome.
Helping folks understand that on the education side, helping people in power understand that on the advocacy side, giving opportunity to both in the access side, and that's what leads to the boots on the ground. So when a business wants to get certified with us, we start it from a baseline conversation about what this means. And it's not a long drawn out, here's the history of conservation in North America. It's not any of that. It's, tell me about where you live. What does your business do? What do your employees do? What are their favorite activities? And as soon as people think about it that way, as soon as a business owner, marketing manager, whoever I'm on the phone with starts thinking about it that way, they realize that conservation's actually been something they care about and have cared about for a long time, or at least their team has.
Yeah.
And so when a business does that, we have that conversation, we always then start from a commitment. So let's say, business doing XYZ calls in, we have that conversation, find out what's important. And then when you first sign on, your first year is it's a commitment. It's not, hey, what did you do last year? Because most folks are not starting from a place of having even tracked what we're asking to be tracked.
Right.
What did you do? What are you doing this year? And what can we help you with? Do you have familiarity with fundraising for conservation? Do you have familiarity of how your industry can be a great partner in very unique ways? Like the foresters that we're signing on right now, just north of y'all in Oregon and Washington, very different relationship on how they're going to use their time for conservation than you, right? I mean, your space is going to become a major hub for conversations where for them, they go out into the field and their time will be put as their profession in the field. So it starts with that commitment. What are you going to do over the coming year? And we bring them on board then. They don't have to wait a whole year. We bring them on board on that commitment and help them over the course of the year as much as they might need it. Folks like y'all don't need a ton. It's the folks who have no connection and who are starting from square one, who we help throughout the year make sure that they give at least 1% of their gross sales, which is one of the two, at least 1% of their gross sales, either in dollars straight to something, whether it's an organization or a project that fits in those four buckets, or it could be product, or it could be their services, whatever they would normally charge. If it's gear or a product in general and they donate it, we count it off of MSRP. So not their cost, but what they would have made. And that counts if they do like a discount program, which we have many business members do. They'll do a discounts for conservation groups. We count that difference between the MSRP and that discount. It could also be use of the space, like what you're doing, providing food and beverage for a conservation group when they come to a space, or put something on at a park or something like that. Anywhere a business is giving funds, either directly or through product or through services, we count that. That includes memberships to organizations. That includes all kinds of things. And so we walk through that with them. On the time side, 1% of time, originally it was 1% of every employee's time. And when you have a business that has like over 150 employees, now you're hiring someone to keep track of those hours. And we just found less was being done with a bigger requirement. Less was being done for wildlife and less impactful for the business themselves on the marketing side, because it's so hard to pick a story, and it's so hard to do something major together. But also, it's hard for the community to understand. Okay, so they send their employees out, and their employees get to go play in the woods. Like it was hard to understand. So what we require now is the equivalent of 1% of an employee's time. Which, if you had a 40-hour work week over the course of the year, that's 21 hours. So 1% time, 1% money, and we found that being real concise with that volunteer time has led our members to do crazy, crazy, amazing things with 21 hours, where before it was like, yeah, we did a trash pickup.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah.
You know?
They get a little more creative when they have that flexibility to kind of shuffle those hours around.
Yeah.
Super
cool. And they can start doing things like internal marketing and stuff around, all right, who's going to get to do those hours?
Yeah.
Right.
And who's going to get to have a voice as to where we give our funds this year. With our model, there's a ton of flexibility for internal rewarding. We really, really coach on the not toxic internal rewarding, because every business, has stuff that isn't done quite as good as it could be. So we help with a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But the main program is that certification.
Yeah.
And then from there, the certification, we really work with our business members on helping them talk about why conservation is important to them. And it really gives them a corner in their community and their consumer base that you just wouldn't have if it was like a Better Business Bureau thing where it's just about
Sure. I think it's fair to say that the conversation of conservation and the culture of hunting and fishing are now happening in the same vein more than ever. I think, conservation and outdoor pursuits, those conversations are ultimately the same conversation more than ever. Do you agree with me? Do you feel the same way? And how do you see that continuing to evolve?
Yeah, I would say that percentage of the population that is aware is more than it ever was. And credit needs to be given to some places that some hunters don't like credit being given on that. When you start to talk about some of the parts of conservation being told no, or maybe not like that, or let's try this instead.
Right.
A lot of that is championed by folks that, are generally not considered friends of hunting, because it is presumed, or for whether it's reality or not, that they're the ones doing the get rid of hunting ballot initiatives.
Yeah.
And there is some crossover into those sections. But in the world, the understanding of conservation, it is absolutely on a similar spectrum as that of hunting and angling.
Yeah.
Those who are for it are a very small percentage when it comes to what we're actually talking about doing. Those who are against it, also a very small percentage of the population. And then you have all these folks in the middle. And that's the same for hunting, angling, and when it comes to real conservation work.
Right.
Prime examples are even within the hunting community. One of my cornerstone moments when I was in my mid-20s, where it really catalyzed what my life was going to be like in relation to the outdoors, and what the focus was going to be going forward, was when we had a grizzly bear delisting from the ESA, Endangered Species Act, a delisting public meeting here in Bozeman. And I went to it. I saw on Facebook, back when I was on Facebook, before that got taken over by the bots and relatives I don't care to talk to that much. I saw on there, and all the different hunting groups and pages, this meeting's happening. Let's show up. Let's have our voices heard.
Okay.
Everyone, oh yeah. Well, I don't know if anything real is going to happen. Oh, they're probably just not going to let us talk, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And it was held at a hotel here in Bozeman, and you have to walk past the bar to get to the conference room that it was in. The bar was full. And I mean, fire marshal should have been called full.
Yeah.
And it was camo, blaze orange.
Yeah.
Some people had signs. Some people were handing out stickers. Some people were trying to sign up members to their different groups, because they knew there were going to be a bunch of hunters there. Bar was smashed full. Hallway was full. You go into the conference room, and it was standing room only outside of the chaired section. And that room was a 50-50 mix of people who visually you would go, I don't think they hunt, because the other ones are all wearing blaze orange and camo.
Right.
So it might have even been tipped even more on the hunter side, because I don't dress like a hunter 90% of the time.
Sure.
Until I'm hunting, But anyway, I'm in the room and I have prepared. I'm nervous as hell. It's my first time talking to anyone from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Forest Service and all that. And I'm going to do it in front of all these people. And I've only lived in Montana like shorter than I feel like I should for getting to say anything, because I don't want to change a place. But I knew hunters who wanted me to talk and stuff. So waiting my turn. And everyone's going up and it's all, let's not delist. Let's not get the state involved and stuff. And then one hunter went up, and it was Kurt Alt, who now works for the Wild Sheep Foundation. He was a wildlife biologist prior to that. He spoke on the science, and that's what it was about, about the science of it and how we're actually starting to get diseased bears now. And then a bunch more, don't delist, don't provide, don't do more research with the state and stuff, comments even. And then Randy Newberg went up, because he's a local too. And then a bunch more people, and then it was my turn. And then like another 40 people went up. Wow. And we were the only 3 hunters.
Wow.
But the room was half hunters. The bar was full of hunters. The parking lot full of hunters. And all I heard was just bitching.
Yeah.
They're not letting us, they're not hearing us. They're not letting us say what we need to say. They're not listening to science. They're not allowing us to have a voice in this process. They did not want to engage.
Yeah,
right.
And
exactly.
my experience with running 2% is that in the hunting gear industry and the angling gear industry, it is that as well. It is a very small percentage that actually want to put skin in the game.
Yeah.
I have spoken on the hunting side with virtually every big gear company, and someone kills the certification.
Yeah.
And it's usually around marketing. They don't want to be affiliated with something that their competitors are. And so they're that small-minded that they don't understand.
God, that's frustrating.
Or they think that it's not going to do anything. Because, again, the hunting world, we're a group of people who do best not interacting with other people. That's when we're at our best, typically.
Yeah.
We're most effective in the activity that we have in common is less people involved, talking to less people, and less time engaging in what needs to be done. And in the hunting gear space, again, anyone listening to this, you're thinking of a name of a gear company, go look on our website who's members.
Yeah.
If the big gear company that you know and like is not in there, know that I've spoken to them.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And we've shown them what can be done and how the model works and the millions that goes into real boots on the ground and real access and real advocacy and real education, and how it's had a net positive influence to make conservation be this big thing that everyone knows about now.
Right.
Or at least has heard of. It's why we have a Conservation Media Award. Know that they know about that.
Yeah.
And they still chose profit, short-term gain over long-term.
Yeah.
Not just for general people and wildlife populations, but also for their business.
Yeah.
I mentioned our Conservation Media Award. We launched that in 2018, shortly after I came on. And I was at an outdoor media summit in Lincoln, Nebraska, full of hunting companies. That's like exclusively who was there. And I told them, we need to have conservation be lifted up more than product. And I got booed by most of the room.
Wow. It's funny you bring that up. Like I was just listening to a podcast, The Wild South, T. Edward Nickens and Garden and Gun, and Eddie. If you're watching this or listening to this, it was a great interview with Hillary Hutchinson, who you probably know Hillary.
Yeah.
And Hillary is talking about the future of conservation and actually does bring up like more companies, more corporations, more businesses being involved in this going forward. As I wouldn't call it a fringe thing for businesses now by any means, but and so it's interesting to then hear your take of like, well, yeah, I agree, but some of these companies are putting their egos ahead of the work that can actually be done.
Your listeners are probably familiar, and I know Hillary is because we've talked about this.
Sure.
We're both two sides of the state, but we end up on the same panels from time to time and whatnot. And her and her sister are doing incredible.
Oh yeah, amazing. Incredible. I hope we can have
They're
Hillary
bringing
on
in
here.
Companies that would be giving to probably some good things. But yeah, she is probably solely responsible for tens of millions of dollars that would have never hit the ground or water.
Absolutely.
For fish and wildlife.
Cool.
We've talked about, and your listeners are probably familiar with the term greenwashing.
Yep.
And how, you'll have a big automotive company that's making billions, and they'll give a $50,000 check and be to some environmental or conservation program, which by the way, those
and call it done. Yeah.
Yeah, and they do and then they'll spend $5 million on marketing
of that event. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the hunting and angling world, we have orange and camel washing.
Yeah.
Right.
They will give, and I know this because we've had some of these bigger gear companies as members and then lost them when they got new ownership or new management. They'll go, why are we doing all this?
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say it with me still on the line, not knowing it was a conference call.
Yeah.
And they will give a very, very tiny amount for them, what could be called a lunch bill when they meet up with a potential partner. They're a $100 million company,
right?
And they give 50 grand, and then they spend 500 grand on making the film about how they gave 50 grand.
Right. Yeah.
And that is the bulk of the hunting and angling marketing that you see around conservation that is outside of our membership.
Yeah.
Now that said, I mentioned we've lost members because of ownership changes and management changes, and it does happen because folks will be brought in to take them. And this is true in business. And the person who gets you your first million probably won't get you to your first 5 million. Who won't get you to your 20 million? You have to have turnover, right? A lot of times, who comes in does not have a direct connection to or education around, specifically the education around why this is important, why it's important to their business, why it's important to their consumers, and they eventually get that, and then they come back. Mm-hmm. And we've had a few of those.
Yeah, yeah.
Right now, we talk about like the trends in conservation and stuff. Private equity buying up a lot of businesses right now is absolutely decimating conservation giving across North America.
Yeah.
Now, granted, the guys in those private equity firms probably go to a banquet and drop a lot of money at those banquets individually, but it's a tenth of what it would have been if that business was still supporting conservation with their time and dollars.
It's fascinating. Humans never cease to amaze me because, in having my own business and me being the only employee and me giving to conservation probably equally as much as I'm paying myself right now.
Yeah.
And then you have these like multi-billion and $1 million companies that are, we're going to, do it this way or we're going to eliminate that. It's, for me personally, I don't believe there's any better way to market my business than giving back to conservation, and whether that be RMEF or NWTF or BHA or, NBU, it doesn't matter. That community rewards you for your efforts.
Mm-hmm. And the people who have learned to tell the orange camel washing from the real deal.
Yeah.
And once you recognize one, you can tell with the same thing. And that's why our certification was started, because this was a problem almost 10 years ago.
Right.
We just now have new money coming in out of tech at that time, which is great. Money coming in out of tech, money coming in from anywhere into the hunting angling space is going to hopefully be a help. And I know, like in your case, it's probably directly connected. In my case, it was my business. I was about to get my business certified. I was the only Google partner in Montana when I took over 2%.
Yeah.
I was about to get certified because it was, I knew, the education had happened. And it's going to happen again. And we're going to see this trend come back around. Some of these big beer companies, you're going to see them start doing the real thing again.
Yeah.
But it's going to take their consumers understanding it, which is why podcasts like this are so important.
Yeah.
Well, real quickly, just the tie back to what it does to all the positive metrics for your community. Consumers, as soon as they see it everywhere, they understand it, and it's infectious. You realize there is something you can do to make the world a better place tangibly, both as a consumer and then as a business owner or employee of a business as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say from that end, especially getting into this stuff a couple of years ago, you're starting to find what gear, what stuff should I use, and I've bought my fair share of stuff, probably more than I've needed, trying to get into this and figure it out. And I meet Tim a few months ago, walk into his shop, and he's showing me the Stone Glacier stuff. And one, I'm just seeing it as something that's a quality product. It's better than some of the stuff I had been buying. And then I see that little purple tag for 2% on it. He tells me about that. And it answers that sort of, and we just talked about this today. I work for a creative agency, and someone on our team was talking to a new client and saying, it's not just, you can do just value, like your product is good, or you can do just values, which is great, but they're not that great on their own, and you really have to do both. Yeah. And so I think a lot of companies tend to tip one way or the other, and it's those companies that you see that really lean into the quality of their products, but also the values that they are putting forth too. And I think it's interesting being in a creative agency. We have our fair share of outdoor clients, and even some of them I've started to have conversations around, access and conservation, and how some of the marketing efforts we're doing with them can maybe play a role in that. And so I see it growing from that end too, also from the consumer customer side. So I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would be lying if I said it didn't play an impact into the brands that I looked at to bring into my store. I mean, obviously the quality of Stone Glacier is unparalleled, but then to be able to tell that story alongside, or Wild Rivers Coffee, to be able to tell that story. Hey, 2% of each bag. Look, the bison on this one means this, and the trout on this one means this, and to be able to tell that story to customers who, there's nowhere within 500 miles to buy Stone Glacier around me. There's nowhere, to buy Wild Rivers Coffee. And a lot of the products that I sell, and a lot of them aren't involved in 2%, but they are rooted in conservation. And I think that's massively important. So, but yeah, you can come shop here and you can double up. You can buy Stone Glacier and shop from me. It's like 4% for conservation.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Fantastic.
It's awesome.
That B2B side, our business members that work together, they are able to communicate further and deeper into the customer base the values of their brand. And when the coffee companies and the backpacking meal companies are prime examples. We have many business members who sell other products, even in their on their website, in their stores and stuff. And when they can go, yes, this business also does that too. Right. Now the person's like, okay, what is this thing, that you're talking about? Because I've been a supporter of acronym organizations for years, and we're 8 years on, but we're still very much a startup because 2020 happened in right the middle of those 8 years.
Yeah.
So, we're still being discovered in parts of the country. And that's why we have, a fantastic referral program. Both for individuals and business members. Individuals who refer a business, we buy them memberships to conservation causes of their choosing.
Cool.
That they can gift or take for themselves, and it scales with the size of business that they bring in. People can and have gotten life memberships.
I'm pretty sure Seth Trokey forgot about that, so don't remind me.
No, he remembered.
Yeah, if anybody's gonna knock on your door about it, it's old Trokestagram.
He passed it forward to someone else.
Did he really?
Someone else's membership.
Well done, Trokey.
And then for business members that refer another, we take what they would have paid in dues to us, that business that they brought on, and we wipe it from the business that referred them. So there's ways for this to expand, but it has to be through conversation.
Yeah.
I every month get a call from someone who Googled a conservation certification, and it is a wildly different conversation. And we might bring a couple of those on a year.
Yeah.
Who just heard about the certification. But that education factor, we're starting from ground zero quite often.
Yeah.
And a lot of misconceptions about
sure.
what, and again, like, I support my local archery club. Okay, well, what do they do?
Right.
You know, what are they actually doing beyond having fun?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and fun is great. I like fun. Was shooting my bow the other night, but that didn't help anything on its own. So we love helping people get launched out of friendships like what happened with Seth. Seth was actually part of a program we had when I first took over. I found out real quickly I was going to be like the conservation phone book or switchboard operator.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone would call and be like, what's a good conservation cause? I'm out of Paducah, Kentucky. Tell me about one.
Yeah.
I'm in Montana, man. Because even the big acronym organizations, they have chapters, and their chapters are wildly different.
Oh, totally.
Across the country.
Yeah.
I can't say you're going to have a great experience, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So we developed a program with folks like Seth, who was a big, volunteering obscene amount of hours with BHA and elsewhere. We grabbed a bunch of those people from around the U.S. and Canada, and I would put our new members on the phone with these volunteers who were talking about double dipping. Now they're volunteering to help certify companies too. And that eventually grew into our community partner program. Our members support over 1,500 different causes and chapters of causes around the world, not just the U.S. anymore. We have members not just in the U.S. and ones that we're slowly in the process of onboarding from very remote corners of the globe.
Amazing.
And that community partner program, we bring conservation groups on board and train them how to talk to our business members to be most effective when they want to volunteer their time and where they want to volunteer their dollars.
Yeah.
And that Rolodex is now the largest collection of, we are essentially in North America, we have the biggest phone book, so to speak, of what and who you should be partnering with as a business to make your dollars and time go as far as possible.
Yeah.
We've actually been contacted by like the Sportsman's Caucus and other government related groups to when they need info, because they know because of our membership, both on the individual and business side, we talk to a lot of folks, which means we also know what's not working and where people should not be putting time and dollars.
Well, it sounds like you have come a long way, even with that break during the pandemic. I'm curious, where do you see the organization going from here? Like, where do you see 2% going in the future?
So the pandemic for us, it was a weird thing. For everyone it was, but in ours, you would have thought like it would have totally ended, right? Like we would have maybe, like best case scenario, lost a few businesses. The reality is we doubled in size.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And then in 2021, again. Now, a big part of that was people starting their own businesses. And so when we were just in those years, it was just trying to keep up, man. Because we actually do have to certify, right? It's not just the helping you give back. We got to call all these conservation groups that have an average employee turnover rate of 18 months in the philanthropy and development positions, which is who we have to talk to.
Yep.
So for us moving forward and where we're going, we are being much more intentional about which industries we are trying to put ourselves in front of.
Yeah.
Because initially it was just try to be at every hunting event, you know, go to every acronym organization's show and say, hey, your support for this group, you can get certified for it. And then they go, well, what do you want from me? It's like, for you to give to this group. Well, that doesn't make sense. How much money do you want? Well, we do have dues, but we can talk about that later. We want you to support this group. And we did that. And we did that for 6 years. even through the pandemic and in the online conferences. Man, I was doing so many webinars in 2020. This camera's probably got burn spots from whatever my eyes and hair looked like that year. But, that was a big part of what we did. And now we're starting to look at who is working on the landscape as a business and how do we bring them in so that we can make this go deeper. And so like the forestry, the ecosystem management, the arborists, the landscape designers, landscapers, especially in areas where people are buying 15, 20 acre plots, we're trying to be intentional about getting in front of those people.
Yeah.
Because we can now make what they're doing go even further.
Yeah.
Right.
And then
That's good thinking.
Pop-up gear companies like your, retail shops like your own, that aren't big box owned, because 7 of the mid-sized regional ones were bought up between 2020 and 2022. And you know how that is. Your competition has $1 billion war chest. But are they necessarily doing what they could be doing with it? No, they're often buying NASCAR teams.
Yeah.
So, the numbers they throw around sound amazing until you realize how big,
Right.
their actual war chest is and what they could be doing. So we're trying to be very intentional in 2024 about the types of businesses that we're putting ourselves in front of. We've always ran a shoestring budget. Our operating budget last year was less than 6 figures.
Wow.
But our members gave out millions, and we helped oversee all that. That has always been the case. But now we're looking at how do we make that budget be significantly bigger, because our members need that much more support.
Right. Totally.
So that they can be that much more efficient. And added 6 figures to our operating budget means I can make those couple million go way further.
Sure.
Way further. So it's not even a question of the value or our ethos about keeping the budget as small as we can. That's still the goal. But in this present climate, this present political climate, not just in an election year, but I'm talking on the global scale, we need to be able to be much more effective. So that's an area you're going to start seeing us doing something we've never done, which is fundraising.
Right.
We're going to do a little bit of that, but the requirement is always going to be that other causes come first.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I definitely want to, like, as a small business owner, anybody that's listening, Jared is by no means saying like, hey, if you're a big company, that's perfect. That's who we're going after. If you're a small business owner, I think it is an absolutely amazing group to be a part of. And if you are not and you want to support, go onto the website and find the tile company, find the piano repair company, find Sheep's Head Outfitters, and support them, because ultimately that we're the people telling the stories just as much as those big companies are. So.
Absolutely, and more often than not, the difference between public perception is just marketing budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why the certification matters, because it supersedes all of that.
Yeah.
You don't get that badge and get to keep it without doing it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And if there's, again, companies that people just for convenience might go to, this is same kind of thing with shopping on certain websites and stuff. The convenience of it is why folks have done it for years, but now they're starting to understand I need to buy just from the company directly if I really care about that brand.
Right.
That badge, it tells the difference.
Yeah.
Between what is greenwashing, what's camo, what's orange washing. And then beyond that, I'm a big fan of the Edward Abbey quote of I'm a reluctant, basically a reluctant volunteer. I'm a reluctant activist.
Yeah.
And I have to spend the time outdoors, and I have to, go and be in connection with the wild so that I keep those batteries recharged. And that is something I think we all have to start to really narrow down what is most important to us in where we put our efforts as individuals, and then of course as businesses.
Yeah.
My business members that are most successful usually choose 2 or 3 things that they really care about, and they go really deep in there. It's like watering a lawn. You don't got to water it 3 times a day. You just need that water to get deep so the roots go deep. And the same is true with your customer base. And that will get you through pandemic years, weird years and stuff. A lot of our members saw epic growth in the years where others were really struggling. And the ones that were seeing epic growth, it was because their roots went deep on conservation. And they were picking up consumers who had been looking for that and finally had the time to find it.
Yeah. I mean, it's those times that really force you to spend your dollar in a way that matters. And so if you have a choice, you're going to really make sure you know where it's going and the impact it's going to make. So totally. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know you have family commitments coming up. Really thank you for coming on, man. It is really actually far more like engaging and interesting and all that good stuff than even I had hoped, and I had a high expectation. So really appreciate it. And if anybody listening or watching, if you want to get involved, fishandwildlife.org is. How did you get that domain? That is so awesome.
The legend I've heard about it, I've heard it a couple different ways. Was Jeff, our founder, who's again CEO of Stone Glacier now, was picking up website domains during the .com burst.
Gotcha.
Out of his college dorm room, something like.
And this is one that he had in the old bank there.
I saw what he had when it used to be, because when I took over, it was still managed in his main account. I was looking at some of those other URLs, and I was like, this dude doesn't need to work, I don't think. Well, he was thinking. But fishandwildlife.org, or you just Google 2% for conservation. If you do that, it helps us a little bit.
Or go out, jump on the Instagram or what have you. Or come talk to me.
TikTok, LinkedIn. And our blog, I would recommend folks this year, if they're curious about like getting into volunteering, we have a 5-part series on volunteering time.
Very cool.
And it gets into the nitty gritty of some of those things right in our blog. As well as profiles on different business members and stuff. And on our website, you can go to the business member page, and there's an actual map as well as listing by industry. So you can see who's near you or what kind of things you want to buy and from whom. And then we also have our groups page, where if they're trying to find conservation groups near them, that page is wildly outdated because, again, turnover rate's like 18 months. It's missing about half of the groups that our members support. So if you don't find who you're looking for there, hit that contact button, and we respond back very quickly.
Cool.
Well, awesome. And like I always say on this podcast, if worse comes to worse, call Sheep's Head. I'll point you in the right direction. I am very honored to be part of 2% for Conservation and to carry brands and support brands that also are part of 2% for Conservation. And John's excited to get involved. He has already bought a couple memberships, I think. And so we're well on our way. But thanks so much, Jared. Really awesome stuff. And
absolutely.
And
maybe one of these days we'll make it out and do a film together about conservation, since everything we're doing now with Curious Hunter is like fishing or hunting films. I think it'd be really cool to do something that highlights it, where there's no budget going towards the making of those films, and we can just come make it for fun.
Do some sheep counts or something.
On the house.
Sheep counts, goat counts. And we can connect if you ever want to do that. We
let us know.
Connect folks with that all the time.
Good stuff. Thanks, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Cool.
That's it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for the opportunity.
This is fun. I learned a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Me too.
You get me talking about some of these things, and I can run off. So apologies if I get a little excited.